the world's writers will walk through those gates. And if you hang around, you get a chance to talk to them.
I'm interested in conversations that deal with things that matter, but real, how do we live our lives?
First of all, make climate change personal in your life. The second step is get angry and get active. And the third step, and believe it or not, I think this is the most important, we have to imagine this world that we want to hurry towards.
It's about kindness is looking at people as people and not as I voted this, I do this, whatever it is. There are some people we will never get along with, but most of us are a complex mass of different things.
My name is Rajesh Hadi. I've been participating in the Edinburgh International Book Festival for many years. The festival has been central to my development as a writer. The thrill I feel as I enter Charlotte Square has never waned. I could always count on excellent programming and stimulating discussions. There has never been a time when such meetings are more important.
Hi everyone, my name is Fatima Bhutto and I'm a Pakistani writer, most recently of the novel The Runaways and New Kings of the World, which is a non-fiction reportage on soft power and popular culture. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today speaking to Adania Shibli. Thank you all for joining us here at the Edinburgh International Book Festival online. Now, sadly, because of 2020, this year's festival won't be in Edinburgh, but not sadly, it's going to be online, which means that you can access it from anywhere in the world and all the events will be free of charge. Adania was born in Palestine in 1974, and she is the author of 3 novels, We Are All Equally Far from Love, Touch, and her most recent work, which we're here to discuss, Minor Detail, which is published by Fitzcarraldo Editions in the UK and translated by Elisabeth Jaquette. Adania is the winner of an English Pen Award, and she writes in Arabic, though her work has been translated widely in English, in Italian, in Korean, and many other languages. I reviewed Minor Detail for The Guardian, and I was gripped by it from the very first page. It's a searing novel about violence, occupation, and power. And Adania's writing is so luminous that it's beautiful, even as she describes chilling atmospheres of tension and of fear. The book is made up of 2 stories, and they are bound by both minor and major details. The first story is set over 4 days in 1949 in the Naqab Desert, where an Israeli platoon has been sent to cleanse the area of all its remaining Arabs. It's also been rechristened the Negev. And on one of their platoon searches, they come across a Bedouin girl who they take captive. And over the next few days, she is subjected to brutal violence. The second story fast forwards in time to Ramallah, where a woman has come across the story of the Negev gang rape and murder and becomes haunted by the fact that it occurred 25 years before she was born to the day. So, Adania, thank you so much for being here today. I thought we'd start just at the very beginning. I read somewhere that you worked on this novel for 12 years. And I wanted to know what brought you to this story to begin with.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you, Fatima, for taking part in this conversation and for taking the time to read it, to think about it. Yes, it took 12 years of work, which is partly also not writing it and or deleting parts. It all started from the relation maybe to the practice of literature in a context where you question the relevance of your daily life in a way. It feels really literature sometimes as a parallel life, that it's not that you run away to it, but somehow it extends to almost caress you. It's like this kind of invisible hand that comes and tells you it's okay. You can keep going on one longer day. I started writing this novel in a very difficult period, actually, of the history of Palestine, where this question on the relevance of literature was quite pressing. And also on the form, what to write and how to write. That was a few years after the beginning of the Second Intifada. There's a great loss of hope on possibilities to live in dignity, as this is a basic, actually, not only freedom or equality or whatever, but just dignity, the basic dignity that cripples you as a human being, and it also destroys you. So you think, what can be done without being crushed or without being somehow revengeful? Because through the whole process, your humanity is being destroyed, and how you can not react to that, but move that somewhere else that can still be creative, humane, and safe. And I think here where writing appeared, but I never wanted to write about Palestine or what's happening in Palestine. I really dislike this relation of about, or speaking about people or about anything. So the question came, how to write from within, like writing as a condition of writing from within that. There is a funny thing sometimes we would play when we stop at a checkpoint, is to do all the activities that they cannot be forbidden or stopped by the act of being checked, which gives you joy. It could be like even sometimes hearing stupid songs, this kind of popular culture that you would never sit at home and listen to it. But also sometimes you have the possibility to see and notice things that you can never see when things are not fast. You know, when you move fast in a landscape, you hardly pay attention to any thing in this landscape. And slowing down, stopping, suddenly you can be sensitive to certain things, to notice certain things. And for me, this was also creating a specific sensibility and sensitivity, a literary even awareness that could be created from the situation. So I started to think of what kind of possibilities for those who oppress you and you who are being oppressed, what literary options there are. And I think that was the starting point as a form.
It's for those who have not read your novel, they may not be familiar, but the story at the heart, the gang rape in the Negev, is a true story. It was a Israeli state secret and covered up for years. And Coetzee calls the nameless platoon commander in minor detail a psychopath, but that's an understatement, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, also, I know often like Israeli military crimes are being defined within psychological terms, and this is as if it's like not the norm. And the case there in Palestine is actually the norm, unless like you name all Israeli soldiers psychopaths, and then okay, can be. I mean, I know there are psychological effects of this condition. But I think this is what the novel looks at, this the normalcy within which violence can be a daily life experience. I was not really, for me, the reference to the real should not be something that much present within the novel. And actually there is a play with that. And there is also, I think, a reason or a rationale behind that, because constantly as a Palestinian, you are subjected to this exam of what you are saying, did it really happen or not? As if you're always exaggerating, you're always not precise, you always lack the means to present your story in the scientific sense. And I think returning to literature is exactly to say, no, this is not about reality, this is about literature. But it is also a game within that, okay, let's relate to all this, these stories as fiction.
Yes. I want to come back to this idea of the game and the playing that seems to happen in the novel, but you did get investigated by Israeli intelligence twice, isn't it? And they asked you once what you were writing about, and you said failed love stories. And they thought, oh, well, that's okay then, and they left you alone. Was that about Minor Detail, or was that about one of your other novels?
Yes, this actually happened when I was researching for this novel. So in one of the trips to the museums, they arrested me. Actually, it was a horrific experience.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, they closed the museum, and there were this kind of 6 police cars waiting for me. They took me from there. And
so you were arrested for visiting a museum and research?
Yes. And actually, I never kind of there while I was there. I was asking them, I bought my ticket, so what's wrong? I mean, what crime did I commit? So they thought I was spying for some country.
Did they say which country?
Yeah.
Oh, it kind of leads into a question I had as well, which is that I wanted to know while I was reading, and then when I was reading about you, I wanted to know if your own research journey was kind of the model. I mean, not the ending, obviously, but for the second story. And so it was. So you did go to the museum.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And this is exactly what I'm like kind of really was playing with. I think this is the border between the real and the non-real. And because of this, what I just said, and this issue that you're always being attacked, that you will never say the truth. So what if we turn that this kind of attack on you becomes your tool for literature? You know, I will never say the truth completely. I will never write the fiction completely. You go and guess.
Yeah.
But this is, will you treat it as a novel? Will you treat it as a historical document? And I think this is a relation to language that you are born with in this context.
I want to ask, if it's not sensitive, what country they accused you of spying for?
Iran.
But that's fascinating about erasure. That you wouldn't even be a Palestinian operating for Palestine. You'd obviously have to be doing something else because for them
Completely.
Palestine doesn't exist.
Yes. I mean, actually, and during the interrogation, they kept moving me from one unit to another. And I kept asking, just tell me what wrong did I do? I visited a museum. I bought my ticket. There was no instruction in the museum that I should not look at it being a Palestinian. There's nothing saying any of that. And it went on. It was also interesting, this experience in the being in the prison. It was one day, like that. Finally, when I got to the main interrogator, who was, I remember him, he was standing in his desk trying to fix a light bulb. And then I waited for him. So there's always this kind of game that we don't care about you, you are nothing, whatever. Oh, why you're here? People passing, policemen passing around, and they say in Hebrew, because I didn't tell them I knew Hebrew. So they were saying, why do we have this doll? That's also their sexist terminology. And they keep saying, a spy, a spy.
Ah.
And at one instance, I was so irritated, and I looked at the policeman, really? Wow, you're really smart. So we were going into this kind of almost fights, and they brought constant security guys to look at me and to leave. So there's always to look at you and then leave. But finally, when this officer went down from his desk and sat, and so I told him clearly, what wrong did I do here? And he was saying, well, I never saw a Palestinian woman with a computer visiting a museum. So I told him, okay, so because they do not fit within your expectations of Palestinian women, then I'm arrested. So which Palestinian women are you kind of familiar with? And of course, you always have the Palestinian woman in this context as the criminal who would be kind of coming to work somewhere because she's poor, and then she's criminalized by the act of crossing without a permit that they define. So it's also these class issues that they're being defined, or whoever he arrests. And it's just not fitting within their image of who you should be.
Well, Minor Detail is so rich with a lot of these details of what life under occupation is like. There's the ritual humiliation that the young Bedouin girl suffers. The ritual shaving, the washing her in public. And then in the second story, there's all kinds of grayer humiliations, the inability to move, to rent a car, to pass it from one town to the second town. And I read somewhere as well that you had described getting used to violence as a martial arts movement, and that the oppressor wants to destroy your wish to live, and you neutralize it by acting as if it's normal, while keeping a secret hidden zone that the oppressor finds so minor that they don't bother to destroy it. And it seemed to me a really fascinating way, number one, to live, and number two, to write, to have secret zones within literature, within ideas, within stories that you can retreat to and expand, that look maybe from the outside innocent. And I was just wondering how that idea, those secret zones or those hidden zones, activate your work in general.
I think it also connects to the margins for whatever is not noticed. And maybe it comes from this, what is there in the center and is being looked at and investigated, and that inevitably becomes marginal and a secret because nobody gives attention to it. And I think this is an area which, in conditions of oppression, is really where you can exist, where you have the freedom to imagine the little thing as a huge thing, and to find in the little thing a force that can prolong your desire and passion and even hope, and not falling victim to despair within that. And also because always the major, the main, the central is always being destroyed. This is where the occupation, how the occupation functions. It just sees what is there and destroys it. And literature, I think in that sense, comes in these margins, in the margins of life, you know? I never thought I will write. I actually don't define myself yet as a writer. I write, but I don't know what I want to be when I grow older.
How do you define yourself then?
I don't know. I write and I'm trying to do other things. I think for me, the thing with writing that is so much on the margin, that is so much filled with strained practice in the context where you witness horrific things. In a way, it does save you, but what about others? It does save your humanity, and then you only wish that it can save the humanity of others, because also, you know, your own humanity has been saved by literature as such. So maybe literature is the secret. It's an activity that takes place in silence as well, and silence guards it. So maybe this is the relationship to writing and how it started.
No, I think that makes sense, especially if we're talking about political literature, political fiction. The most powerful examples I can think of are never about the big story. They're always about the intimate moments carried through big stories. And I'm interested in some of the threads that connect between your stories. I have a very specific question, which you'll have to forgive me for. But first of all, there's no one has any names in Minor Detail. What was the reasoning behind that? Why did you give no one a name?
The short answer, I didn't find yet names for them. The longer answer is, I think naming is an act of power that I don't want to practice. And I think it also relates how I write. For me, I feel language as a living body. It exists. It has its agency. And within that, names, they become something alien. I mean, there wasn't the second part, there was some section that I hesitated of naming, because when she goes to this museum director in a settlement, and they introduce themselves to each other, whether to use names or not. And it was never her name as well, because, you know, the idea of her name, she should never have stated what is her name, because she's taking the ID of somebody else to move. And then if she gets to the settlement, she will never be allowed in if she has a Palestinian name. So also often these names, they are indictment. They are the first, you know, some in the context of racism, there's the racism based on how you look. And when the passing happens, there's also sometimes, what is your name? And in that way, maybe the name is really also an act of power, that disclosing it would play into these dynamics of oppression, of indictment, of violence that you will experience just by saying your name. And there's a hint to that. And maybe there's a hint also to changing names. You know, it's very interesting also that in the context of the Israeli state, how often migrants, they have to change their name. They are somehow upon arrival to Palestine before 1948, they all use different names. So more Hebraic names, biblical names, also the names of the cities. So there's all this act of naming, which is very, very heavy. And within that, I couldn't find how to address the naming of the characters without going into something completely grand, although the topic seems easy.
No, and it's something I noticed as well in Touch, which is around the Sabra and Shatila massacre as well, isn't it? That there's a connection in terms of namelessness and silence. There's a lot of silence that pervades the novels. The Bedouin girl in Minor Detail never speaks either. And this was a question I had while I was reading it. Does she speak? But they don't care. You know, we're looking at it through the platoon commander, and he doesn't care what she says, or he's not interested in her experience, her suffering.
Yes, certainly. I mean, this is the words also in Arabic. This is the language that is the minute that you say it, this kind of amazing language for me, what it is, this language that I kind of jump in it like somebody would jump in feathers or whatever. It's so playful, like, you know, old amazing language. I become like too much. I speak about Arabic language, but suddenly this language, when you say it in front of an Israeli military or settler, it becomes this trembling language, the fear of saying it, of speaking, of uttering words, because the language is only treated as a threat, as something inferior, as something, you know, all these relations to language, which I think it's not only specific to the Palestinian context, but we see migrants in the West, for instance, how their languages are being buried and how they're always accused of the irresponsibility of being excluded from society because they speak their own language. So always language becomes a threat. And this is very violent treatment of something that is so intimate that you grow up with. You could have read, I don't know which literature, which song, whatever, suddenly it becomes one thing in the eyes of the other, and this view is being forced on you.
Moving from language, I mean, it's sort of connected, I suppose, because you're going to read for us shortly. But I just wanted to ask you one question before we go to the reading about movement. Again, there's something, well, it's like there's a harmony of how you treat things in this novel. When we see movement in the first story, it's through the Israeli platoon commander, and he just glides through his life, you know, whether it's the scorching desert, whether it's murder, he just has this incredible ease of movement. And then the second story about the woman in Ramallah, she's denied movement and mobility at every turn. There's a worry, how will she get from where she is to where she needs to go? She's not permitted to enter certain zones. She needs to rent a car, but she's not allowed to rent a car. Who's going to rent the car? And she has to stop and consider everything she does, from, as you said, what name to give someone, what she can eat, how she has to present herself. And it seems to be something, well, in a way, it might connect with readers today living in lockdown. I mean, they live in lockdown for all of, or we live in lockdown for all of 4 months, and it's suffocating. And this, to me, was a novel really about occupation in so many ways, and you illuminate the suffocation just never ends. I mean, it's not really a question. I just wanted to hear more about, did you have to pull back at certain things because you thought, oh, people will not understand that? There's no way they will.
Yeah. You know, about the lockdown, actually, when it happened, I had this immunity. You know, everybody has the antibodies for the virus, but I had the antibodies for the movement, you know, the prevention of movement. Because yes, this is a condition that, not that I could move, the thing that I, as a person, I could move freely with no problem because I have different papers. I have this kind of blue ID that the character borrows from another, but then you don't move. You really don't move. There is something that even if you have the possibility to move, you don't, because where are you gonna go? And what are you going to experience in this going? There was something, I have a friend that she learned psychology at Haifa University, and she told me about it's really a frightening experiment. Haifa University is also this kind of all Israeli universities. They are not so much a kind of acting in a separate way from the military, or actually the military is using universities for research, whatever. And there was this military experiment in her department that she witnessed, not as a military, but people in the military that were engaged in that, of something called learned helplessness. So you put food in the middle of the room for the mice. Okay. But this plate is connected with electricity. So when the mice want to go to eat, they don't know when the electric shock is gonna happen. So sometimes they might get the shock, sometimes they might not. And eventually what happens with time, because they don't know when the shock is gonna happen, they stop moving and they die of hunger because they are afraid. And when she told me that, she told me she was doing she continued her PhD in psychology in London, and she told me that, and suddenly things came to kind of an understanding, exactly this what happens to us. Because even though you know you can, but you're not sure the checkpoint is open or not open, you're not sure what's gonna happen. Are you gonna get something or you're not gonna get something? But also if you go, what about your friends? Until now, when we go to Palestine with my family, with my son, he has his friends, we can go to the sea, but his friends cannot. And how can you explain this lack of justice to a 5-year-old kid? And so it's better you don't do it. You better not go to the sea and not discuss it with your son. It's easier, you kind of lock something. But then this movement becomes, you become motionless. And the pain that to do something from one movement to another is really, is kind of something unimaginable. It doesn't always happen, but it can happen. You can go from Ramallah to Al-Khalil to Hebron. In the old days, it used to be 40 minutes. Now, in the best, the best open checkpoints, it's 2 hours and a half. So it's like 5 times more. But if the checkpoint was closed, and it might be closed, you would spend the whole day and it's hot. So this is where movement becomes a weapon that you have the freedom, the Israeli military saying, we are not always closing it. But you become your own oppressor in a way because you're afraid.
Of course, it's the oppression of bureaucracy. We're not always closing it, but we can't tell you when it's shut, and so it's up to you to figure out.
Yeah, and you become your imagination shrinks, and then, and this is also maybe where we have the character that when she doesn't go right in the street, she doesn't turn right. It is the experience of many, in a way, of the inability. And when you arrive there, what you have to wait. And you can wait actually sometimes for 3 hours and a half. And it's also the theft of this time, but also how you turn this theft of time into something else, because it can be a moment of something static. It can opens you up to something else, to see something else, to connect something else. There's also a joke, some friends would say that all these kind of the checkpoint made it an equal experience to everybody. So these beautiful girls you will never see walking, crossing the checkpoint, suddenly you will see them, and it's like they're not sitting in their car driving through. Come on, you're gonna get down and be squeezed in the same line with 300 people, rich or poor.
Yeah, you have a moment in the book that I think would be great if you could read for us. That's kind of around this theme that we're talking about. And so you're going to read us a little section and you're going to read in Arabic. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. وبينما لم يتحرك صف السيارات سوى بضعة أمتار، كنت قد انتهيت من دراسة جميع الشعارات والرسومات المخطوطة فوق الجدار. الذي لم تبقى عليه تقريبا رقعة غير ملونة، إضافة إلى صد كم هائل من الأولاد الذين حاولوا بيع أشياء لا حاجة لي بها بالمرة. آخرهم كانت فتاة صغيرة شعرها منكوش ووجهها أسمر، يسير المخاط من أنفها، تبيع العلكة. فتحت حقيبتي وتناولت من داخلها منديلاً ورقياً وقدمته إليها، طالبة منها أن تنظف أنفها. فاختطفته هي من يدي على الفور واختفت عن الأنظار. ثم وقبل أن تلوح أمام الخوف فرصة الاستفراد بي، ظهر بعض الأولاد ثانية محاولين بيع مناديل ورقية هذه المرة.
Will you tell us a little bit about why this is a special section for you? You've read from it before, yes?
Yeah. I really like this character. I think hardly anybody noticing her because she's so minor.
Yeah.
And maybe she's the minor detail in the novel.
Well, I want to ask you, here's my other specific question. I mean, he's not minor at all, but the dog. In the first story, you have this dog who is a cipher of suffering and fear and so many things. And in the second story, there is a kind of ghostly figure of a dog. And when I was reading the book, I mean, I have so many sections that I've just underlined, oh, the dog really moved me. And I wanted to know how you, well, first of all, why a dog? Do you have a dog? And how you arrived at the dog as a kind of presence that reveals so much in both stories.
You know, I always wanted to have a dog, but my evil mom, she never allowed me. You know, whenever I tried to bring a dog to bring up a dog, the dog would disappear when I come back from school.
Oh no.
Yeah, they tell me, oh, a friend came and they really loved this dog and they really got attached to it. And, you know, of course, you're generous. You should offer the best to the others. And then, yeah. So that's my, you know, my dog finally living forever.
You did him very well. I mean, it was really painful to read so many sections with the dog in them. I was really... one other detail in the book is, of course, as you said, all the minor details coalesce and they're very meaningful. And at the same time, you use them in satirical ways. I mean, maybe funny is the wrong word, maybe satirical is the right word, but in the second story, you have these great moments like the street names in the settlement that are totally meaningless. You know, it's like Jasmine Street or Narcissus Street, and they kind of erase what settlements mean. And then you've got that Australian museum curator who doesn't even know really the history of what he's curating. And you said earlier that oppression and occupation, they deform so many things. They deform the soul, they deform the experience of life, they deform our ability to love, but they keep humor intact. It keeps humor intact, rather. You know, no oppression has come out that has stamped out people's ability to find the absurd. Was that something that, did you have editors push against that with this book? Or were they not laughing when they read those moments?
No, I think, you know, humor and satire are being accepted. I mean, it's really an experience, you feel it. There's something really funny, we always say, maybe I said it before, but, you know, we have a joke also in Palestine. The minute that you put the camera on and you speak to a Palestinian, like, you know, they're serious, almost gonna cry. And the minute you turn off the camera, they crack and laugh, they're funny, they joke and so on. And we know it's important to be funny. And actually the funniest amongst the Palestinians are the people from Gaza.
Okay.
And it is, you know, probably you cannot be heard from the same place again and again. You develop a certain way to, this is almost like martial arts, how you turn the situation into something else that is funny. And you find this also in the African American tradition, you know, like there's also this white master, but there's always the slave behind making fun of the master. Because it also gives you a sense of, okay, it is the power that they are enforcing you, but sometimes maybe humor through humor, you're going to find this little leak, this little crack to say it's your thing, but it's not ours. We can do something with it. And yeah, I mean, that one also, like, to make the desert bloom. I mean, imagine if you call all these settlements with names of flowers and trees, like you save yourself an effort to plant them, you just call them. You see the power of naming. This is the power of naming.
Yes. And I don't want to be an abuser of power, but I do want to know, because I read somewhere that you said minor detail was not your initial title. And so I don't want to take on an oppressive stand here, but I'm really curious, what was your initial title for this book?
Oh, they have been changing and they're really not good. And, you know, once because I was like tormented over 12 years what to name. And then I kind of took secretly the son of my friends on their side. He was 5 years old and he was smart with language. So I presented him. I told him this title or this title or this title. And he told me, or is really nice. So then I realized how bad my titles are. And he chose or as the best option.
But it's a particular thing with writers. I mean, I've never met a writer who says, I had a title and everyone loved it. It's always a battle, and the author never seems to win. It's always someone else who gets to pick it, or someone else who has the genius. Or, I mean, that could be a great name for a book. Maybe your next book.
Or, yeah, I always called it, but then it was, you know, like this or that. But then, yeah, I mean, then minor detail was there as if it's like the thing that was there. Then one day I said, okay, yeah, it's there. I have not seen it. It should be that one. And it calmed down then. I think at the end of the process was also the end of finding the title.
That makes sense. I also think that as we're winding down, there are a few things that I want to ask you before we have to go. The first is that writing fiction can often feel like a revelatory act. You know, you set out to do one thing, and of course, once you sit down, that one thing doesn't obey you, and you find, you know, moving yourself in another direction. What were the revelations that you were struck by while working on this book? What were those revelatory moments?
I think it's this what I was speaking about earlier, like how language is dynamic. It's basically what's happening constantly with this novel. Whenever I wanted to control the process or to have this kind of macro narrative, it kept collapsing. Something was insincere, as if really I had to wait. But there was one moment I was really struggling with the end, how to end the novel. And that appeared in the 12th year. And it suddenly happened. I don't know how, because this novel had went through many transformations. So the end was completely different. And then I was like, yes. And I was shouting, like, I did this to her.
Yeah.
And this was like, kind of, it's over. It's really over now.
We must be sensitive about spoilers, but I have to say, when I read your book, on the last page, I was totally shocked. I mean, it was really, I couldn't, of course, you see it coming now when you think about it, but it was I don't even have a word. It was, what an ending. That's what I'm trying to say, Adania. What an ending. So
it was not easy. It really kept maneuvering around me. And, I work also with readers. Like I have my 5 faithful readers.
Yeah.
That they really, if they say there's something wrong, I go back and work another 2 years. One experience of writing the first chapter is really like how the perspective needed to be moved like 1 centimeter away. And imagine like you have a house, it's finished, and then you need to move it a little bit away. And this took another 3 years, but I have to do it because these readers, they are, you know, we share something. And in a way, when I write, I don't write with the awareness of any reader. And then sometimes I cheat. I get tired. I get tired waiting for the words. I try to have a shortcut. Let me write that and that's it. And I try to cheat well. I try to do it really, kind of pack it nicely. But they are so cruel, these readers. They say, no, this is cheating. This doesn't work. And then, yeah, this shortcut is you go back, you know, the longer route and do that. Yeah. And so they were never convinced really by the ending. One of them was saying, I don't like the ending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, bravo. You've got good readers, I have to say.
Yeah, thanks to them, yeah.
And one of my last questions before we wrap up, I mean, I don't want to do the awful thing and ask you, how did you spend lockdown? Are you working on another book? But I know those are terrible questions, but I would like to know what you're reading. I think it's always fun to know what writers are reading and what moves them. If there are books that you feel strongly about that you want to recommend to people who loved yours.
Well, I, of course, after Pakistan, I know you might say it's a cliche, but I came back with Manto, and I've been reading Manto. Manto. And now I have Clarice Lispector. I don't know, I read 50 books at the same time. I read one for the morning, one for the afternoon, one before coffee, one after. It's like, you know, I like to be, you know, there's my friends, they're always around me. But sometimes I don't read a lot of fiction. I have to admit, especially when I write, and this is like in these 12 years, I hardly read fiction. But there's these writers, I would say that amongst those I really loved. And actually I saw today a note that I wrote about this Robert Walser, the Swiss writer who spent the last 20 years of his life in a mental health hospital. And he died. He used to have a walk every day. And he was found dead in the snow in one of his walks. And he wrote a book called Walks. And today I was going back to see my notes for the new novel, and I came across this note that I wrote about him that I was writing. I was happy to read him to understand that I'm not insane, that I am a normal person. But then I remember that he's actually insane, this guy. So my sanity is derived, from somebody who's insane. Yeah, well, but he's fascinating. I mean, I would recommend him for. Okay. Yeah.
Walks is the book.
It's called in Arabic. I mean, in German, it's Gehspazieren. It's like a walk. Yeah, but maybe in English it's translated as picnic, or it's a weird, fascinating, amazing book. I am afraid to read it again. Ooh. Yeah, it's a fascinating book.
I'm definitely adding it to my list. Adania, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation, and also
thank you
for leaving us with the great news that you're working on another novel.
Yeah, this time it will be short, only maybe 7 or 8 years, I think.
We'll wait for it, however long it takes. Thank you, Adania.
Thank you, Fatima. Really, yeah.
My pleasure, and thank you to all of you who have logged on to listen to this conversation. You can get Minor Detail, and you must get it, from the festival's online bookshop, which is shop.edbookfest.co.uk. This year's festival program is going to be free of charge for everyone. And if you enjoyed this conversation and the many others that will be online, then I know the festival would love it if you could donate. It's thanks to all the festival supporters and generous donors that they're able to put this kind of programming up free of charge for everyone to have access to. So thank you again, Adania, and thank you to everyone who watched.